Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with jazz guitarist, composer, and educator Hans Luchs. On the heels of releasing his 2015 album Time Never Pauses, this Chicago jazz musician stays very busy in his world as a leader and is a sideman on many gigs. Over the course of our discussion, he talked about playing in Chicago and around the globe, why he loves jazz, who his heroes are, and much more. Dig this interview, my friends.
Thanks for taking some time out for me today. I appreciate it.
No, of course.
So I'm going to go ahead and dive in. I know that, on your website you have a listing for all of the activities that go on, but I always like to know from you, give me a snapshot of activity that's been going on lately.
As you know, I put out that record kind of recently in September here in Chicago. I did some CD release shows for that, which I did those shows at the Jazz Showcase here in Chicago and Andy's Jazz Club. Have you been to Chicago before?
Oh, yeah, I love Chicago. One of my favorite towns in the country.
Oh, cool. Have you been to either of those spots?
It's been so long ago. The last time I was there was in '04 to see a Cubs game at Wrigley, but every time I go, I hop around and go to different clubs, and to be honest, half the time it's a total blur. I don't know exactly where I've been, so... But that is on my radar to get some good jazz in up there here soon.
Oh, okay, cool. So yeah, I did some CD release shows for that. Another thing that I do a lot of is I do quite a bit of like sideman work, and recently I've done a couple of things that have been pretty cool. Just about a week ago, not even quite a week ago, last weekend, I recorded a record with this drummer here in Chicago, Gustavo Cortinas, and it's a project of his that we've been working on for a while, and I think that went really well. And that CD is going to be out probably at the end of the year. And then the month before, I did a project with the bass player that I really liked here in town, Andrew Vogt, and that was recorded in February. So those are two projects sort of back to back that I was really happy to have the opportunity to be a part of and contribute to, and I think they went really well.
Well, so let me ask you, since you brought it up and it's on your radar so much now, your newest album, Time Never Pauses. Talk to me about this album, the creative forces that went into it, and kind of just the general feel of the album for you.
Sure. Well, in a lot of ways, this first album of mine, Time Never Pauses, it's the first album under, as a leader under my own name. In a lot of ways, there wasn't necessarily a particularly cohesive force behind it. And what I mean by that, some of those songs were songs I had written at this point about 4 years ago now. But because it was my first record, I had some songs on it that I had just written right before the session. And I had some songs on it that I had written, about 4 years prior. So the next record that I do, all the music will be much, much more recent, Even though I still have some older songs, that I haven't recorded, the ones that didn't make it on the Time Never Pauses will probably never make it onto a record, So those are probably never going to be recorded. So from here on out, it'll probably be much more recent. So the first record, honestly, I just had sort of a small backlog of songs that I thought were good enough that I should release them, and I didn't want to wait any longer because I thought, well, I'm already writing all these new songs. I want to get these songs out now because I think they should be out, So there wasn't any necessarily for the first one, even though I put a lot of work, and we can talk about that, I suppose. The actual concept of it was very simple, which was, I've got these songs and I'd like them to see the light of day,
So let me ask you this. Did you grow up in Chicago?
I did. Well, I grew up just outside of Chicago in a suburb called Aurora.
Okay, in Aurora. So give me an idea of your childhood and how you got so interested not only in music, but more specifically in jazz.
Great. Yeah, that's a great question. There's a few pretty important, musical influences and forces in my life. Let's say my life pre-college. So I moved to Chicago when I was 18 to start college. So let's say before that, my older brother is a guitarist and still is a guitarist, and that's how he makes his living. And he lives in Nashville, and he's kind of more on that scene. But he played guitar before me. He's quite a bit older than me, actually. He's about 8 years older than me. And so when he started playing much later. He was about 15 or something. And when I started playing, I was about 8. And I started playing a little bit after he did because I kind of thought it was cool, you know. And I kind of, a lot of times if he was doing something, I was like, oh, I should be doing this too. So that's kind of how it started, really. And then I had the good fortune to have my first guitar teacher who I took with from 8 until 18 when I graduated high school. His name was John Papadolius, and he still lives in Aurora, and he's still teaching people. He was a huge influence, and he introduced me to people like Wes Montgomery and Grant Green and Django Reinhardt and guitarists like that. Not to mention all kinds of other people. He's got a really eclectic taste, and he's really into a lot of, you know, different kinds of music. And then I think the other big influence was my father, who he doesn't play a note of music and never has, but he listens to a lot of music. And he was not by any means a big jazz fan or aficionado, but he did have a handful of good records, including, you know, like he had some of the real sort of obvious ones, like Miles Davis, you know, Kind of Blue, for instance. He's got that one, and he's had some Coltrane stuff and things like that, but enough to get me started, you know.
Very cool. So when you were a kid, you obviously had a lot of these musical influences, a lot of great musicians you listened to. Was it always music for you, or did you have any other aspirations of what you wanted to do with your life?
That's also a good question, because it wasn't always music. No, the first thing I wanted to, it's really, as far as I can remember, there's really only been 2 careers that I've wanted to be, a musician, but the first one being a writer or author. I don't think it's ever been anything other than those 2. But yeah, I think the musician thing, even though I started playing music around 8, I think I wanted to be an author or a writer from around that age until probably about 14 or so. Yeah. And it was around 14 that I kind of shifted from wanting to be a writer to a musician.
Doesn't being a good writer lend really well to a music brain, though?
I would hope so. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think so. I mean, you know, certainly, of course, I write my own music, so I guess, you know, if you think about it that way, of course, they're pretty related. So yeah, no, I think so, and it's not necessarily so uncommon. You do hear about, there are, of course, examples of musicians that also do some writing on the side, and the other way around, too. You know, and essentially, if you think about, like, singer-songwriter types, guys that write lyrics and things, that's almost what they're doing anyways, you know?
Absolutely. Well, and you obviously had to put that writing to the test. You got a bachelor's in music performance from the University of Illinois, and then a master's at DePaul in jazz studies. Talk to me a little bit about what you got from your formal education that led you to being a better musician.
I always kind of tell people that I feel like the much more important education comes outside of school, which I fully believe. But that being said, I don't mean to downsize the importance of the formal education, because I think there was some really important things that came out of that. For one, I started studying actually a little bit before I attended University of Illinois Chicago. About a year before I started attending there, I began studying with the guitar teacher over there. His name is Vladimir Todt. Really great player and great teacher who he's got a very interesting story of his own, but he's been in the U.S. now since I think 2000, but he grew up in Serbia, where there's not a whole lot of jazz, especially when he was growing up. And then he moved around to Amsterdam and Hungary and all that, but eventually worked his way here to Chicago. And so I studied with him, and he was a big influence because he had really clear teaching methods, and he was a very much kind of no-nonsense teacher. He wouldn't really let you get away with slacking. Not that by that point, I wasn't necessarily trying to slack off, but even still, he was really good about that. But honestly, I think really more important than my musical studies in college, I think college I'm more grateful about everything else, like the whole, all the other classes I had, all the general music classes I had, like music theory and which was most of my undergraduate, most of those 4 years, the classes I was dealing with were more like classical music classes, not very much jazz. My lessons were jazz, but the classes were more like classical oriented. And I'm really, happy about those classes because I think they were the kinds of things I wouldn't have studied on my own. Because jazz, I've been into jazz for a long time. I'm always going to study that on my own. But the classical stuff I might not have ever studied on my own had it not been for college. So that's kind of more what I'm thankful for.
So let me ask you this about live performing. Were you nervous when you performed live in the beginning, more now than you are? Or, how have you always felt on stage?
I guess it depends. For the most part, I feel pretty good on stage. Typically, it's not bothered me much. But there are exceptions to that. I do know I've noticed throughout my life that sometimes if there's particular people in the audience that I know are in the audience that I really, really look up to, sometimes, that can make me a little bit nervous. I know that's happened before where, it's like, oh, so-and-so's here and I want to make sure I play well for that. So that's something that has happened over the years and maybe still does happen, but I think, at this point I try to, I just don't think there's not much. Not that that's something that you necessarily consciously decide to either be nervous or not be nervous, of course, but basically in general, I feel like what's the point of letting something like that, whatever, psych you out or however you'd like to call it. But yeah, that sometimes happens over the years, but at this point, I'm just going to play what I'm going to play, and it shouldn't really matter who's there or not there. I should just always be trying to play my best, and it shouldn't, it shouldn't have a lot of bearing. So for the most part, I've never had too much stage fright, but like I said, I can't say that for 100%, because there have been times where I think it probably affected my playing, knowing that so and so might have been there.
Absolutely. Yeah, we can only be human, that's for sure.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. So I think that's definitely true.
You played live in a lot of places, in Dublin, at J.J. Smith's, the Jazz Bar in Edinburgh. You've been at Belfast, Mexico City, London, Toronto, all over the place. Was there a particular venue that kind of blew your mind? You're like, wow, I'm on stage here. This is happening. It was very cool and surreal.
Probably in my own hometown here, adopted hometown, Chicago. I grew up in Aurora, but I'm living in Chicago now since 2007. Probably playing here at the Auditorium Theater in Chicago actually was probably the most surreal experience because that was my first time playing at the Auditorium Theater. I forget exactly, but it's a beautifully constructed theater, and people say, for instance, off the top of my head, like Jimi Hendrix played there in the 60s, and it's really got amazing sound. And I played there this past summer with an artist from Mexico, Pepe Aguilar, and it was sold out. And it was just an amazing experience playing a show there at a sold-out venue in Chicago that's got such beautiful acoustics. And I forget exactly the capacity. It's approximately 4,000 or 5,000 capacity place, and that was probably the most surreal. But I think beyond that, as far as traveling, my first experience in Mexico City, playing at Zinco Jazz Bar over there, was really amazing because I'd never been to Mexico before, and you don't typically hear in the United States about Mexico City being much of a hub for jazz, but that place when I was down there was entirely full and so enthusiastic and such a great audience, really, really attentive audience, and that was kind of an amazing experience. Those are the two that come off the top of my head, but getting to play in my hometown with an artist, that sold out the Auditorium Theater that was a surreal moment. Yeah,
absolutely. So speaking of performing with someone that's a big shot like Pepe, you've been with Martha Reeves and Shirley King. What's it like to get on stage with someone that has so much experience in cloud and their performing history?
you kind of just can pick up on it, I guess, that they've got this sort of, I guess, command, you know, you realize, and that's something that I realize that they have that I don't have, which is this aspect of like, sort of like show business and sort of, owning the stage, I guess. And I don't mean that in a negative way, the show business. They're through and through, they're entertainers, you know, like for instance, specifically like Pepe Aguilar and Martha Reeves, they're very much entertainers through and through, and they're great singers, but they just know how to really bring it, and they really know how to perform, you know, and that's something that I could really learn a lot from, because I do not have that sort of stage presence about me, you know.
Sure.
And I think that's partially why they are in the position that they're in, you know. And I don't know, I think it's also not necessarily, you know, might be a chicken and an egg type of thing too. You know, you have that in you, but you also probably get that from being there. So I don't know. But I guess to hopefully answer your question, that's what I kind of felt right away. I just was like, wow, okay, these people really sort of seem like they belong here, the way they're carrying themselves.
Absolutely. No, that's a great answer. Let me ask you this. So you know, in your adopted hometown of Chicago since '07, you've recorded, you've toured, you've been in a lot of venues. Tell me what's so great about the Chicago jazz scene.
I think the greatest thing about it is just the amount of great musicians and players here. Because that I'm always amazed by. I'm always meeting somebody new that's just really good, and it's like, you know, you think, I mean, I never think this anymore because I know better now to think this, but, you know, you sort of almost think that you kind of met all the great musicians here, and then of course you're wrong. You know, you meet somebody else that you've never heard of that just blows you away. So that's, I think, really the best thing about it, because the truth is that, in my view, Chicago, it is a great jazz scene, but that being said, there's really not that many places to play for like actual jazz clubs. You know, depending on how you look at it, there's about 3 or 4 of them here, you know, which is not nearly enough to truly support all the great jazz musicians we have. So in Chicago, I see there being a bit of a problem of there's too many musicians and not really enough places to play. I mean, there's all kinds of places to play if we're talking about like jobbing type of work and rock and all these other kinds of things, which is great. But if we're talking just specifically about jazz, unfortunately, there's too many great musicians and not enough places to truly support the scene, you know, as we would probably like it to. There is also a number of like sort of like, you know, gallery type space, more experimental kind of spaces in Chicago. We've got quite a few of those, which can be very cool. So there is that kind of scene going on as well.
Right on. Well, you mentioned your teacher when you were from about the age of 8 to 18 that taught you. How have the teachers in your life influenced your current teaching philosophy? What is that?
I think I just mostly want kids getting interested in music, not necessarily jazz, you know. I just want kids to be, you know, music lovers, and whatever kind of genre they get into is fine by me. You know, I would just rather them be listening to music than not listening to music, and playing music than not playing music, you know, or at least listening, honestly, because listening is just as important, you know, because like I was saying to you, you know, the fact it doesn't matter that you don't play, because we really need people that want to listen to it, you know.
Sure.
And so, you know, that would be great, you know. And oftentimes the way it might work out is that somebody plays in childhood and maybe sort of gives it up by the time they reach adulthood, but they're still really into listening to it, you know. So I think that can be definitely a way to foster the growth, you know, maybe playing as a kid and then maybe still dabbling as an adult, but, you know, getting into a different career, but still wanting to go out and support the music, you know.
Absolutely.
But I guess as a teacher, it's a combination of trying to introduce them to stuff that I think they might like and that I like, and then trying to just listen to what they like and kind of show them what, you know. So they might come in and say, you know, hey, I really love Blink 182, you know, and okay, I don't really love Blink 182. I'm not a fan of that, but you know, if they're passionate about it, I'll try and teach them, you know, and then maybe slightly nudge them in other directions to see if they take to it or not. Whereas
Absolutely.
I think my teacher is Vladimir Todt. I think he's much more hardline than I am. He's got much less interest in music outside of, say, jazz and classical and a few other select. You know, I grew up listening to classic rock through my father, so I like classic rock. I've got no qualms about saying that I like it. I'm into it. I don't really play it that much, but I like it. You know, and I love R&B and I love soul and all this stuff. Whereas I think Vladimir, I think he genuinely doesn't really like those styles of music that much, most of those, you know, with some exceptions, you know. But we've talked about the Beatles before, and I love the Beatles, you know. I'm completely into them, and he's very much like, oh, you know, they've got a couple of okay songs kind of thing, you know. And that's a very different view from mine.
Yeah.
You know?
No, I'm a Beatles lover myself. So, you have mentioned some, you know, musicians, jazz cats on the guitar that have influenced you, Django and Grant and Wes. If you could go back in time and hop into kind of this time machine and see anybody in the history of jazz alive, where would you go and who would you see?
Well, you know, I know I've talked with people about this before, just, you know, in conversation have come up, and I've always said, very high on the top of my list have been Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers. And probably during the era with either, you know, like Lee Morgan and Benny Golson, or with like Freddie and Wayne, you know, and like Curtis Fuller. And I would just love to see that band because I can just imagine the power that band would have live, you know. They would have so much volume and sound and power, that band, you know. That would just be, I think, mind-blowing, really.
Yeah, I agree. Let me ask you a general question. Why do you love jazz?
You know, at a certain point, it's even hard to, like, you know, to even put it into words exactly. But I mean, I certainly can. I mean, so much of it goes just how you feel about it, I guess. But I think, you know, jazz, it's the freedom in it. You know, the freedom to express yourself. You know, the creativity. The feeling of it, you know, like, you know, literally when we're talking about swinging, that feeling of swinging, but also, you know, the openness that the music has and the inclusiveness. You know, we all know, you know, nowadays how jazz will meld itself with just about any other musical style imaginable, you know, and different kinds of fusions and whatnot. So I think for me, it just kind of boils down to this sense of freedom and expression, really. I don't, you know, I think that's really the main driving force behind it.
Right on. Let me ask you this. Let me kind of ask you, this is my final question, and I want to know, you know, everybody has their interpretation of who you are, your family, your friends, your business associates, but who do you personally think you are?
You know, to start with, I'm Hans Luchs, and I guess to me that means, you know, I'm a musician, you know, not necessarily unlike a lot of other musicians. You know, I'm here trying to make my mark in the music scene, and by that I really just want to, you know, leave a positive legacy. I want to leave some, you know, music, you know, that hopefully people like, you know, music that I've written, hopefully that people can get into, and you know, just experience the world, experience other cultures. I'm really into that. I've gotten a chance to do a little bit of that already. And I just hope to keep on doing a lot more of it, meeting people through music, you know, and experiencing life through music. And I guess I'm a musician is what I think. I'm a musician and a composer, and beyond that, just a person, you know, because I enjoy talking to people from all walks of life, you know, not just musicians. I'm interested in talking to writers. I'm interested in talking to scientists. I'm interested in talking to all kinds of people. And really, I just want to do my craft well. And so that's really about it. I'm a musician that likes to travel and meet people and share my music with others, you know. And first and foremost, I think I really like playing with other musicians, you know. I don't know that I would ever be that interested in playing solo shows, because I just think jazz to me and music to me is about playing with others. I mean, solo concerts are amazing too, but I just know personally for me, I love, you know, the interaction that comes with playing with other people.
Right on. That's a perfect way to kind of wrap everything up. Hans, thank you for taking some time out and opening up your story and talking with Neon Jazz. I appreciate it, man.
No, thanks so much for calling.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to yet another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in New York, Chicago, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Hans for his music, his story, and his time. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store, or visit the neonjazz.blogspot.com for all things Neon Jazz. Until next time, enjoy the music, my friends.
Neon Jazz.